Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're live. This is Todd Lewis, host of the Praise of Folly podcast. This is the first episode, episode 0 of hopefully a monthly series called The Roundtable, where we have people from different perspectives discussing either current events or discussing philosophy, economics, a whole host of different issues. And we're going to start off with Alex Brewster, and you can discuss your position, what you represent, and how you came to your position, and then we'll just go in alphabetical order down the line. So the floor is yours, Alex.
All right, so I'm here to talk about anarcho-capitalism. So first, anarchism I would define as sort of the lack of an institution which has rights for which other people do not have parallel equivalents. So this is distinct a little bit from Max Weber's definition of a monopoly of force. However, I would say that Max Weber's definition is within my definition. So if there is a monopoly of force, that's an institution that has rights for which there are not parallel equivalents in the subjects. I just don't use the term monopoly, partly because I have other problems with that term, and also because there can be some cases where perhaps there are states that aren't monopolies. I can get into that more later, but so that's the anarchism part. The capitalism part is more specific, is that I support private ownership of the means of production, private property, and trade between owners of property. So the very basic overview, I would say, is that each individual is sort of a customer of a rights enforcement agency. And these rights enforcement agencies are what generate rules which are then enforced. Now, I think a common misconception comes from the fact that it's more important, I think, to describe what it's not than what it is. Anarcho-capitalism doesn't describe the specific structure of the rights enforcement agencies. It doesn't say exactly what type of organization they have to be. They don't have to be hierarchical. They don't have to be anything like that. In theory, you could have horizontal structures within these organizations, and it would still count as anarcho-capitalism, I would say. So then I think I probably have to talk about how I would define property, because that's a pretty central concept. So I would say that property has several characteristics, each of which is sufficient but not necessary for it to count as property. By that I mean you can have one of these things and it would be property, but if you don't have every single one, it can still be property. So these things include the right to use a particular item, the right to exclude people from a particular item, the right to consume, and the right to destroy. So to give an example where you could have some rights and not others, say I own a pen. I have a right to just snap this pen in half. No one would consider that wrong. At the same time, I can have an ownership claim over a pet, like a dog, but many people would have a problem if I were to just, destroy my dog at will. So I could still say that there's property in the dog, but you don't have to necessarily have the right to destroy in the same way. Similarly, with some sort of agreement where something is borrowed, like if I were to lend out my bike to my friend now, in a sense, has an ownership claim on that bike, but he doesn't get to just destroy it because he has to return it to me later. So I think that's the most basic I can get, and I can answer more questions later. I don't know how long you want me to talk.
Well, if you're done, that's fine. Alex Fontana, why don't you describe your position? Maybe how you got there as well.
I feel like this is like roll call in school. I was never super good at it. But let's see. So I guess the alt-right essentially puts identity as kind of a central pivot or component within social issues and society generally. So in this way, the alt-right Enlightenment conceptions of the self, notions of civic nationalism that atomize the individual as a kind of social unit, as an island onto themselves. The alt-right is generally tribalistic in outlook, and it derives some sense of social Darwinism and realism in regards to scarcity of resources and strength in numbers. In this way, there's reverberations of proto-fascistic and even fascistic nationalist movements from the 20th century that saw strength in numbers and in identifiable groups. I think the alt-right has obviously it has multiple. It's been labeled a big tent ideology quite often. I tend to veer towards the a left-wing interpretation of things. I'm not a libertarian, and I guess the left wing interpretation is interesting because for me it's also overlaid with a sense of a traditional interpretation about various stratum in society, and the capitalist or the merchant stratum being second from the bottom, third from the top. In a traditionalist critique, has kind of overturned the order of the soul and created a world in which the superior miscarries, while the inferior and mostly the mediocre tend to multiply readily. It's a swamp, and we've created a swamp world. And for me, the alt-right is about order. It's about hierarchy. It's about family. It's about traditional values, and it's about identity and belonging. So yeah, I think that's a good little intro.
So, Brenton, why don't you introduce your position?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Brenton Lengel. I am a poet, playwright, screenwriter here in New York City, where I've been for the past 7 years. And also, I would consider myself an anarchist in the classical tradition, which is distinct from the anarcho-capitalist tradition. Then Alex and I met each other going back and forth about that. So we may butt heads on it. But a little bit about my background. I went and joined Occupy Wall Street in 2010. Right after it had started, once I started to see my friends getting arrested there. I was on CNN a couple times. Once there was a bit with a big black and red sign that said "Class Warfare, Bring It." That was me holding it, which I think was on the front page of their website. And then for 2 years, I had a radio show that was heard everywhere from the United States all the way over to the China and the Russian Federation. Called Insurrection with Brent Lengel. I had anywhere from 100,000 to 1 million listeners per episode, though I have no idea how many of them even spoke English or cared. They may have just been tuning in for the music. So overall, I am, your classic left anarchist. I don't really identify with the mainstream left. If you ask me what kind of anarchist I am, I'll tell you my own kind. But the closest that you can understand me as is I currently am most interested in the ideas of the anarcho-communist, anarcho-syndicalist school of thought, going back to Bakunin, Peter Kropotkin, and Emma Goldman. I'm also very interested in the Spanish Civil War. I've written a movie all about one of my idols and heroes, which is the famous anarchist Buenaventura Durruti, who took an army of farmers and factory workers, and when Spain's military went fascist, defeated them with antique rifles and handmade bombs. Then collectivized the entire city of Barcelona. The anarchists ran it for about 3 years before they were backstabbed by the Bolsheviks in alliance with their supposed allies, and eventually the whole thing was lost to Franco. Durruti himself went down and fought against Franco in Madrid, won his first battle, and then depending upon who you ask, he was either hit by a random stray bullet, killed by a fascist sniper, or, in my interpretation of it, assassinated by a Bolshevik to prevent the anarchists from gaining enough prestige from the battle. But beyond that, what I believe at the moment is I am very fiercely egalitarian, very anti-hierarchy. I learned these beliefs over the course of most of my life. I started out very conservative, was a libertarian in college, and then when I got into the workforce, I worked a number, because I'm working in entertainment, I worked a number of low-paying jobs, mostly for amoral and abusive people who would, take advantage of young actors and their desire to work and do their art, and to essentially run things in very dictatorial ways. The other reason I'm an anarchist is I'm an Appalachian Trail 2,000 miler. So I've walked the entire extent of the Appalachian Trail from Maine to Georgia, and the community there, like when you're a thru hiker, it's completely different than anything that you've ever experienced. Like you brag about how little you have. 20 miles out in the woods, there's no law, there's no police, but everyone takes care of everybody else. It sort of rebuilds your faith in humanity as the entire thing runs on random acts of kindness from strangers. And today, even when I think of an anarchist society, I really think of taking that model and applying it to the larger society. Obviously, some things have to change, but that is sort of my goal, to kind of recapture the kind of freedom that mankind had when we were in our pre-state societies, but still maintain the vast majority of the material comforts and technology and medicine that we have access to today. I would say overall, my main concern is the centralization of power and the idea that power corrupts. I do not support the free market for two reasons. One, because I don't think the free market actually can exist. And when the invisible hand is an actual hand that is controlled by people, who are the most powerful actors within that market. But also, I don't support the free market because it's when you destroy the ability for people to group together to press for their rights. What happens is that you create a environment where bullies are very rife to thrive. Similarly, I do not support the state, which my definition of it is a little different than Alex's. I used a variation on the Max Weber definition, but I'll go on to say that the state is a professional hierarchical institution in which follows a strict line of command and obedience, and it is used primarily for the purpose of maintaining a monopolistic use of force over a given geographical area, but also the state uses that force primarily to secure and defend property, which I think the fact that we cling to property at this point and we everyone's sort of obsessed with getting their own little, personal empire, like Breaking Bad. I think that's an incredibly toxic idea. I think it leaves most of us in a very difficult position. And I think if we just let go of that idea that some of us can be billionaires and some of us can be millionaires and the vast majority of us can be working stiffs and the poor, I think every single one of us can lead a much more fulfilled life. Where I come from religiously is I'm a Nichiren Buddhist, and we follow the mystic law of the Lotus Sutra, which is known as Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. Nam-myoho Renge Kyo is the mystic law of the universe. The primary meaning of it is that all human beings, no matter what, are essentially the same thing. And to deny this fact, to deny that we are all equally worthy of respect, admiration, and the ability to survive and thrive, that is an expression of fundamental darkness. So robbing someone of their life, robbing someone of their dignity, of their freedom, this is about the worst thing you can do in my religion. And as a result, I am very dedicated to that. I also believe in the use of direct action over the use of electoral politics, and I believe that it is important to violate laws when they are judged as immoral or are causing serious problems. If we're talking Dungeons and Dragons, I'd say my alignment is chaotic good, and I believe in an end to property and an end to the suffering and the suffering, abuse, and the deaths and problems caused by, I would say, starvation, exposure, overwork, and the depredations of greed. And the way that I see towards doing this is to fight for a classless, stateless society in which the means of production are held as the common property of all and are effectively owned and controlled by the workers who use them. You can look into models of worker self-ownership for this, but all in all, I would say what I care about most of all is life and freedom. And it's something that I am willing to fight for. I've put my body and my freedom on the line. And in fact, my picture is me being arrested by the NYPD. There's a knee being driven in my spine right while I'm yelling about that. Yeah, and at this point, I sort of envision a society in the future to work towards where we can take care of everyone, and everyone is able to help everyone else become their best self by creating a perpetually positive feedback loop. I am not personally at the moment behind the idea of violent revolution because of my Buddhism. I think that the use of violence, while sometimes necessary, is problematic in the sense that if you try to achieve a revolution by violent means, you're not going to get the government or the world that you want, because the karmic fallout from that will inevitably result in a more oppressive thing. You can't try to work for a peaceful society and at the same time, you can't kill and murder your way to it. You will have to deal with that baggage. That said, I do a lot of karate, and I am perfectly willing to throw down to protect myself or others if I have to. So that's me, essentially. I'm, classic kooky artist, wilderness guy, and I am very excited to exchange ideas with all you guys.
All right. Next up is, I think, Matt. So go ahead, Matt.
Hi, everyone. I don't think mine will be quite as verbose as the previous two. I've spent the last several years majoring in mathematics. I think it's most important to clarify my own way of thinking before I judge other people for theirs. And that's basically why I'm here. I'm friends with Todd. We both agree that political communication is very, very important. We're getting more and more divided. It's leading to violence. And so that's the primary reason I suppose I'm here is mostly to listen more than to speak. My own politics lean more toward a state, but more of a minarchistic one, which basically I think of the state as more of a bargaining group of last resort for people who are having their rights infringed upon. If the people with the powers that be in the market have something to gain by taking somebody's property, they hire militia, they hire everything else, and people need help defending their property, defending their rights. You appeal to the polis at large and say, "Hey, back me up," and that's basically what the state is supposed to do. But I lean left on some things as well. So what I don't know, I'm still hearing arguments on everything. I'm not too attached to most of my positions. I suppose the most accurate thing I can say is that instinctively I lean left when it comes to the majority of issues, but I have been and often are, pulled to the right after I've talked to people about things. So I guess that's me.
All right, Sean, you're up.
Okay. Well, I was invited on as a MGTOW guy, so I'll just start with that. Basically, I think the relationships between men and women are drastically, well, at the very least, they're not healthy, and at the very most, they're actively detrimental to both parties involved. I mean, there are many problems that could be touched on, and overall, as MGTOW, I think the most important thing that people talk about is the sex differences and what to expect from women, and what you should prioritize in your life. I don't think women are inferior or anything like that. Indeed, a lot of MGTOW have a lot of problems, seemingly not being so autistic about things. But I think men need to know, especially now in this incredibly damaged culture, that women are probably, well, they're definitely dangerous. You know, more than half of marriages end in divorce, and the marriages that do stay together are probably very unhappily loveless marriages. It's a very bad state of affairs, and there's seemingly no country and no people that is untouched by this. Maybe it's a facet of modernity. Who knows? But I'll just be talking about what I think experiences with women too in general. I'm not an incel or anything like that. In fact, I have a girlfriend right now, but I still hold true that MGTOW is probably something every man should at least look into. Do you want me to go with my more alt-right views?
Sure. Sure, go ahead.
Okay, I could elaborate it specifically on, you know, what because I'm probably further right than the alt-right, but I can elaborate on what I think. You know, I guess I would call myself a fascist, but what I think fascism is. In fact, I have the definition written down here, my own definition. What do you think? Should I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so let's see. I wrote down, what is fascism? Okay, so the dictionary definition of fascism is an authoritarian and nationalistic right-wing system of government and social organization. My own definition would be fascism is an extreme right-wing authoritarian hierarchical form of government in which civic nationalism and ethno-nationalism are heavily emphasized. Fascism cannot be described in the abstract. It is not a universal idea that can be applied to any nation. Instead, fascism is specifically tailored to each individual nation and the people within it. Unlike modern-day conservatism, fascism is aware of the deeper culture war being fought by the left and seeks to fight it with its own ideas. So it doesn't stay into politics like the most right-wing movements today. It goes into culture too. In my view, the people are the government and the government is the people. The land, culture, history, government, and spirit of a nation are all direct extensions of the people themselves. They are all part of the same whole. Fascism, in my view, is a form of government that cannot exist on a spectrum and will always defy any utopian or universal ideology. People should embrace their place in life. Women should accept what they are and you know, be women. I don't think women should have the right to vote. I don't think they should be allowed to fight in the military or, you know, run for office or anything like that. But everyone needs to know their place and accept it. I don't like this. Everyone in the modern West wants to live above their means, but that's not possible, and it's causing a lot of suffering. Essentially, I believe people's options should be limited for their own good. I don't think most people can handle limitless freedom. I mean, the 20-80 rule of 20% of people have agency and 80% don't. It's probably more like 15 to 5% of people have agency. The majority of society cannot be run on the assumption that people can be reasoned with. And I think the biggest flaw the West has is the Enlightenment idea that everyone can be reasoned with. I think we need to go back and undo the assumptions of the Enlightenment and find another way to go down another road that's more productive. And I don't have all the answers, and I definitely haven't read all the relevant literature of fascism or anything like that. But I can try and offer my view on the world and what I think. I guess that's about it. But
Okay. Yeah, so I'm the host, Todd Lewis. I represent since a lot of these positions are to some extent based on modernity. I represent the more traditionalist perspective, which rejects pretty much modernity in toto as the idea of non seriam. I will not obey. So basically, right, traditionalism says that there's, as Confucius pointed out, there's four basic relationships. You could also add a fifth one, which I'll add at later. And they're all hierarchical and between unequals. One is the king over the subjects, or ruler over subjects, husband over wife, parents over children, and elder brother over younger brother, and one could also add religious authorities over the laity. And so there's these sort of, and these are consistent trends throughout the world, whether you live in Aztec Mexico, Ming China, or the Ottoman Empire, or medieval Western Europe. They pretty much all have these same considerations. What's different is the implementation of those power structures, but not so much the acceptance of it. In that way, it's similar to mathematics. When the Mayans are building their pyramids, they're using the same mathematics as the Babylonians who built the ziggurats. And the point is, though, they were determined independently of one another. Now, it's not nearly as precise as science as mathematics, because there is disagreement even between traditional societies how this works. But the idea is that fundamentally traditionalism accepts the position that authority, legitimate authority, is good and should be obeyed. That human flourishing is best achieved when individuals properly understand their place in the hierarchy of society and within, whether it's appealed to by nature or God or the gods. Depending on who you talk to, they're going to use a different justification. The other thing is that man is not perfectible. Man, most modernists, whether they're national socialists, communists, anarchists, or libertarians, believe that at some point through the application of science and man's reason, he can be perfected. Traditionalists say no, man cannot be perfected on his own terms. They almost always admit to some sort of divine agency that intervenes at the end. For Christianity, it's the second coming of Christ. Islam has their own second coming, and but even for ancient pagans as well, they for instance, you have the parable of the guy that I forget his name now, but he killed his father and married his mother, Oedipus, and basically he had to figure it out. Make it right for all the things he did wrong was submit to the gods, submit to their justice, submit to their mercy, which is completely the opposite of most of modernity. So generally speaking, I'll be defending the traditionalist perspective in general, but the Christian traditionalist perspective in particular. So now that we've sort of introduced ourselves, is there any topic? Well, I think one of the things that we should probably jump into is sort of the right versus left distinctions. Without getting too deeply into it, I think that as far as socialism, I think that, on the alt-right, I've talked to some alt-right guys as well. I had a podcast on fascism once, and, they claim to be socialists, and the socialists on the left say, well, you're not socialist. So Alex Fontana, if you don't mind, why don't you explain why you think that fascism or National Socialism can be considered socialist?
Hello. Well, I'm not precisely a National Socialist, but fascism, the first real fascist movement that took the name fascism was the Sicilian Peasants' Revolt. That was about, and this is, I think, prior to Novecento, prior to the 1900s, which was really about left-wing socializing, more egalitarian, more workers' rights, things of that nature. Fascism really came from a left-wing milieu. Mussolini was obviously, he was left-wing throughout his entire existence. And the standard, I guess, critique that Marxists make about fascism is that socialism is that it's the kind of like last bulwark of capitalism's last breath, where they instead of, I guess, fixing the working conditions of most people, they instead recapitulate to the capitalists and then take that workers' libidinal energy and direct it outward toward an external enemy, something along those lines. But the actual, I guess, track records National Socialism, as far as Hitler's economic miracle, accomplished with the tenets devised by Gottfried Frieder and implemented by Alcimar Shiat, or whatever the hell his name is, however you pronounce that. And similarly, some of the educational reform put forth by Giovanni Gentili about fixing the Italian economy, but specifically leading from having an educated electorate, not electorate, but an educated citizenry who could aid. This idea that the state was something transcendent in Gentili's system, but I would say totalitarian which is henceforth, because we view fascism from the bias of Anglo-Jewish liberalism, capitalism, totalitarianism is now. But what it actually meant is that you live in a totalizing system where all the parts work in sequence to a whole. So it's like if you're conducting an orchestra, every instrument has its role and everything plays together in a harmonious totality, versus kind of the laissez-faire, more or less capitalist system today, where everybody's kind of, you have autistics playing, tambourines in the corner, and everybody's off key, and everybody's marching to the drum of their own rhythm, and it's this cacophony of sound today. And so I think fascism and National Socialism is generally about order, and through order is the only way we can actually achieve any sense of social justice. Because if you don't have the order, then you have disorder, and through disorder, you can't disseminate things, and you can't organize things in a that would benefit people. At the same time, fascism and National Socialism recognizes that there are inherent differences between people, and hierarchy is a natural state of affairs, and there are a scarcity of resources, and at some level, some people are going to get more than others. So it's not a communist system. It's not a utopian system. It's very realist in its conception of human nature. And yeah, so it's a mixed bag. It takes the best from the socialist, what socialism has to offer, and left-wing critique and Marxism, and it takes the best from a traditionalist perspective and preserves the culture and the character of the people involved, while also respecting family life and the private sphere. It is, bar none, probably the best devised system, and that's why it was known as the third position, because it transcended both the left and the right, and the absolute left and the absolute right.
Okay, yeah, I just want to jump in real quick and comment on Alex, what he said about how the left views fascism as the last gasp of capitalism. I agree that's total crap. I mean, Mussolini himself was a radical socialist who wrote for Avanti during World War I. In fact, he's sort of the first fascist leader of any country, and he came from the far left. And not, of course, to save big capital, but to save the Italian nation. But so yeah, you wanted to make some comments on what was said, Brenton?
Yeah, actually, so I'm actually kind of a bit of a pass of which to respond to first. The talk about women, or I suppose, or the talk about fascism. I'm going to lead off because I'm actually a happily married radical feminist. And my feminism actually comes about as a result of my anarchism. I can't see any justified reason for holding men over women. There's no rational reason to do that. There's also no rational reason to hold one race or one people over another. And you're sitting there, you're talking about like how identity is the core of fascism, and identity can be used to organize people, but ultimately it's a superficial thing. I mean, we know that humans in particular, out of most other animals on the planet, are far less genetically different than other animals of the same species. This came down to the fact that we were killed down to about 2,000 or so humans living in sub-Saharan Africa. Every single one of us is black. You go far enough back. And as we move forward, you find genetically that you can have more in common with someone of a different race than someone of your own. Similarly, we have all of these ideas about how we can judge just by looking at a person and just by seeing, what social caste they come from, what gender we think they are, what race, what country. And what I found is when you actually get out into the world and you put yourself out there and you take that risk, when you meet people, people surprise you. I think the smartest woman in the world, Marilyn Beausavant, IQ of something like 220, also maintains that IQ is complete crap. Right there, there was this big thing that happened a number of years ago. There was the Monty Hall problem. And what you had essentially was the show Let's Make a Deal. Everybody, there's 3 doors. Behind 2 doors are goats. Behind 1 door is a brand new car. You win the new car when you pick the door. People were obsessing over this. What is the correct way to answer this question? And they went back and forth, and mathematicians said, "Oh, you do this, you do that. It doesn't matter." Marilyn put out the opinion that after you had picked the first door, when one of the doors was revealed to be a goat, you always switched, and if you switched, you suddenly had a 2/3 chance to be right, as opposed to a 1/3 chance. Now, mathematicians, huge professors all over the country, came down on her. You got to go back to school. You got to learn what you're doing. You stupid woman, all this stuff. And then she sat down and said, no. And she wrote out the equations. And the thing is that these professors, they looked at these equations and they said, yeah, you're right. They knew objectively that she was correct about this, but the connection could not be made in their brain. And this wasn't because these guys were stupid. They weren't stupid. They were actually exceptionally intelligent. But what we find is that different brains perform different tasks more easily than others, and vice versa. I have slight dyslexia. As a result of that, I remember when I first encountered the Monty Hall problem, I thought of this thing like, and this is known for, stumping statisticians. I looked at that and, it was hard at first, but as soon as I figured it out, I was like, oh, it's like a baby question. Like something a fifth grader would tell another 5th grader to trip them up. And that's not because I'm super smart. That's because my brain is wired slightly differently. So I think the idea of hegemonizing a society and forcing people into caste based upon sex, race, nationality, creed, whatever, it's really, really insanely stupid. Because what happens is that when you prejudge someone, you're going to miss something of them. Humans are some of the most complex creatures on the planet. And every time we have seen a civilization try to distill itself into a specific identity or a specific race, it falls apart massively. The Nazis were responsible for perhaps one of the worst things. Like the Holocaust was honestly like the biggest blunder of any culture ever. We can talk about this or that, but I think overall what's really important is that when we judge people, we judge them as individuals. And that's where we come from first. And then, if we want to talk about, national background, personal background, education, that's fine. But what a human being is at their core is they are an entire universe, a unique universe where you can view everything in a unique way that will never, ever be seen. And I guarantee you, every single one of us here can learn something from every other person. There's going to be something in there, no matter how stupid, no matter how angry or that we think they may be. There's something valuable in that perspective because no one's one thing or another. We're all, big old tapestry. And that's my response there.
Yeah, Jolly, you wanted to make a response, right?
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I gotta say, come on with the Holocaust stuff. I mean, what did the communists actually kill at this point? More than 100 million people, their own people. I mean, okay, at least with the Nazism, you know, they didn't. They killed others. They weren't killing. They weren't gassing Germans. They were gassing gay Germans and German Jews. But I mean, they weren't actually gassing German people. I mean, a man-made famine in the Ukraine before World War II even started killed more people than the Holocaust. I mean, the communist body count is much higher. So let's not exaggerate that the Nazis did the worst thing in human history. It's a little silly, but I mean, I would, Alex and Brent, I would like if we could get away from the Nazism, because I mean that's 100 years old and outdated, and only maybe could have worked for the Germans. In no way this is relevant to anything we're talking about today, and the modern right and the alt-right shouldn't be trying to make any connections to it. Unfortunately, we can't help but draw a comparison, but we need to just drop that shit. It's like it's a noose on an X. It's stopping the right, and bringing this up isn't helping anyone. Oh yeah, sorry about the language, but what Nazis right? Oh well, I mean, okay. I mean, okay. The Nazis reigned for 30 years. The Soviets had over a century. I mean, the Soviets still killed 10 times more people, and most of the deaths from the Holocaust happened near the end. But anyways, to Alex, I would not draw comparisons to Nazism, because it's not. Okay, Nazis killed them. Anyways, I would not draw comparisons to Nazism because it's no longer a relevant ideology. I mean, I don't care about National Socialism. I'm kind of neutral towards it. I guess that's it. Oh, and feminism. If I had to say feminism, I mean, obviously men and women aren't equal. I mean, I guess you could say, there are occasionally women that do things, but I mean, for the vast majority of human history, men have overwhelmingly been the thinkers, inventors, philosophers, writers, soldiers, protectors, the physical laborers. Overwhelmingly, I mean, probably somewhere like 99.99%. They are just not physically the same. I think you're just ignoring reality if you say men and women are the same. I mean, obviously they have different needs, and they have different things that they want, and they have different things that they can do. They should occupy different stations in life.
All right. I want to ask Alex Brewster. Do you have anything to say about this whole socialism, racial identity thing?
Well, first, I'd like to make an important distinction between political institutions and what follows from those, and specific actions and motivations of political agents. And I think once we've clarified this a bit, then things will be better. So a lot of people seem to support a particular position like fascism or totalitarianism or democracy. What they're really defending is not necessarily the system, but some stipulated behavior within the system. For example, you could have a totalitarian leader that doesn't specifically enact your particular ideals about race and culture and whatever. So you're not really defending fascism in that way, because none of the particular policies which you want actually follow from having a particular leader in that way. And I think that the communists do this too. A lot of their arguments against capitalism really come from stipulating benevolent people within communism and then bad people within capitalism, and they can't really see that that's the issue. So if you want to talk about culture, we can do that, but it's important to note that culture doesn't just follow from the political institutions. So that's the clarification I would say. And then regarding men versus women, I'll say something briefly about that. There are differences genetically between men and women, but what's much harder to actually demonstrate is that such differences generate some different rights. So why do these differences, to the extent that they exist, and they're not as dramatic as I think many people would say, but why do they generate additional rights for men over women, and thus it's just not clear. That would require some actual defense, and I could address arguments if they were presented.
So I want to jump in for a quick second here, specifically because there was a charge that leftists, when we talk about equality, are talking about men and women are the same, or people from various nations or whatever are the same. No one is saying that. In fact, it's obvious that there's a massive amount of diversity between human beings. I mean, once again, describe this as subjectively inside our heads, self-contained universes that are unique. I think that what people confuse when leftists talk about equality, what we're talking about is we're talking about moral equality. We're talking about doing our best to make sure that each and every human being, whoever they are, holds roughly the same amount of political and economic power. And I think that even in the event that some of these may deserve a little bit more economic power, or may deserve a little bit less as a result of their abilities or their or what they're able to do, it's important to break up that power like that, because when you create these executive positions for people of a certain race or a certain social class, you increase the chance that someone who is not worthy of that is going to get into a position of power. And when you have extra power that is tied to identity, what will happen is once someone who is unworthy of that, they will begin to act foolishly, and they can cause a great deal of damage. Whereas if you keep people more or less roughly about the same level of power, talent is recognized, and ability is recognized, and overall, people are smart enough to figure out who's saying something worthy and who isn't. So I sort of look at it as, right now we've got a political vacuum, like a power vacuum, that's stuck with several large rocks. And when leftists talk about equality, what we're talking about is break up those rocks and jam it with 1,000 pebbles, and you will still have the same, essentially the same equilibrium, but there is less chance of abuse and foolishness once we have actual equality. And then and only then are we really going to see what the real factors in human nature really are. Because, as Emma Goldman puts it, poor human nature, what crimes have been committed in their name. Every fool from king to policeman, from flat-headed parsoner to visionless dabbler in science, presumes to speak authoritatively about human nature. The greater the mental charlatan, the more likely they are to insist on the wickedness and weakness of human nature. And also, I want to give props to Alex, because that was great. Alex Brewster. Thanks.
All right, Croc, you go, then I'm going to say something.
Well, actually, I was going to pose a question to Brent, so do you want to say something first? Todd?
Yeah, sure. We've got some people watching, and they want to ask some questions. And Echo Rain asks, what is more important, material well-being or spiritual well-being? I think it's to the whole group.
If I could answer that, it's kind of a funny question. I mean, obviously material well-being, because you have to survive. Look, if you're saying whether you should donate money or, donate food or build a church, I would say build a church. If you had a poor community, building a church is probably the better thing. I mean, everyone needs spirituality.
Okay, as far as if the question is directed to everybody, why don't we just go off in alphabetical order, if you want to answer that question. So, Alex Brewster, you would be first, so go ahead.
Well, I would say that in talking about the value of things, it's important to consider marginal value rather than total value. So how much one unit of spiritual well-being or material well-being is depends upon how much you already have. For example, if you have no food at all, then if you're about to die, your spiritual well-being isn't all that important. Whereas if you have a lot of material things already and you're lacking some spiritual well-being, then it's important. Also, I'll just say quickly, I didn't mention my background. I'm currently getting a graduate degree in economics, so.
All right, Alex Fontana, did you want to respond to that question?
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, it's the great kind of Cartesian dualism between matter and spirit. I'm not sure who it was. I think it might have been Socrates. Somebody asked Socrates the question whether it was better to be wise or rich. And he answered that it was better to be rich because the wise always work at the behest of the rich. So my metaphysics, I would put matter and spirit kind of on an equal and an intermingling plane of existence. I think it's not good to be poor in spirit, and it's not good to be poor in matter. I would prefer us to be rich in both. I know that kind of dances around the question a little bit, but I see them both as integral and interconnected. And partially, I guess it's a question. I mean, Christian morality tends to veer towards the spirit, obviously, and that's part of the Western tradition. And you know, we do have a sense of aesthetic tradition within that. But Ma Teresa, I think, worshipped God as a gift, and that's part of our tradition as well. I do think that I have a bit of a more pagan outlook, and I do think that well-being is good for the soul. At the same time, I do see value in suffering, and not all suffering is equal, and some people are engendered to suffer more than others. And it's partially a perspective thing. It's like, what do you, from the suffering, how do you interpret it? So there's a subjective element to that as well. I don't know, I'm just talking philosophically about it, but I'll end there.
All right. Do you want to answer that question, Matt?
Sure. Yeah. I think going off of first Alex's response, not going into strictly like marginal benefit analysis of all of it, but I think of two types of spirit. You've got I guess transcendent spirit that lets you think of things beyond yourself, your station, you, the world, and you've got basically this self-actualization type of spirit where you're basically in your groove as a person, doing what you were, I don't know, quote unquote, meant to do from a teleological perspective. Some people just have gifts that just make them really, really naturally talented at some things over others. And sometimes, in order for people to learn that about themselves, they do have to have a certain amount of material access to things, right? You know, a wood carver who never has access to a knife or trees will never find out they're a good wood carver, and vice versa. So I would say that there's a minimal level of material needs that need to be met before people can self-actualize. And once people are comfortable with their self-actualization, and they're going through the groove and doing what they can do in life, they're free then to think about things outside themselves, and they can be drawn more, religiously and that sort of thing. So it's a complicated question.
Okay, I'll give you my answer. I'm not going to be terribly long-winded. I'm going to quote Matthew 16:26. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? And then 1 Timothy 4:8 and 9. For bodily exercise profits a little, but godliness is profitable for all things, having promise of the life that is now is, and that which is to come. This is a faithful saying and worthy of all acceptance. Now, that's my answer. Another question, we have two questions from Oscar Feinstein, and I don't know who it's directed to, so I'll give it open to everybody. The first one was, well, I think almost 80% of the rapes in Sweden are committed by Muslim immigrants. Whether you think it's racial, cultural, socioeconomic, post-racialism is in part practical and downright suicidal. That's probably more directed towards Brenton. And the second question is, why is equality something we should strive for? People are biologically and spiritually unequal. There are men of race in quality, and there are beggars. Inequality is important for our survival. So the first question, I think, is directed towards Brenton, and I think also the second question is probably directed towards Brenton. So why don't you respond to both of those?
Absolutely. And I'd like to actually say right beforehand, very briefly, I can't believe it, but I actually agree with the alt-right guy on for different reasons, but on the spiritual well-being versus economic well-being. I think that they are two sides of the same coin, and ultimately there is no division between the temporal and the spiritual. You can't have one without the other. You can't be happy with material success without spiritual fulfillment, and vice versa. You won't be successful if you're not happy. So on to the two questions. The first question, can I get that one more time real quick?
The first question, yeah. The first question was, almost 80% of rapes in Sweden are committed by Muslim immigrants. Whether you think it's cultural, racial, socioeconomic, post-racialism is impractical and downright suicidal. I think it's about open borders versus closed borders. Why would you support importing these people into your country, given that they do 80% of these terrible things?
Well, I would take massive issue with whatever source is saying that 80% of the rapes are committed by. That's ridiculous, because we know that most rapes are committed by someone that the victim knows. The idea of like forcible rape of someone just like jumping out of the alleyway and raping someone left or right or whatever, that's not going to happen. And oftentimes what happens is that the more xenophobic forces in society muster propaganda. And what they do is they do that to demonize people who are different from them. So I would say to that question, 100% of what you're saying is a lie. Now, there may be ways to twist the facts to make it look like that, because there are liars and damn liars and statisticians. But I would say take a look at the source that you're getting that from, because I don't know where your sources are, but that does not sound even close to right from me, knowing what I know about rape and criminal justice. Now, on to the second one. Why is equality a good thing to strive for? For the same reason that, how many Einsteins died in a cotton field? You never know where a good idea is going to come from, and you never know where an important perspective is going to come from. And mankind, we are not perfectly rational beings. We are massively flawed, and even the smartest of us make mistakes. So when you go and you try to enforce inequality, what happens is that you enforce what is necessarily a incorrect view of reality. Also, what happens is when you enforce inequality, you create privilege. And as Bakunin put it, the privileged man is a man depraved. You can take a true genius and give him all of the privilege known to man to a station, and you'll turn him into a charlatan. Because he no longer has to work, he no longer has to struggle. He can go easily with his first idea. Struggle, it is necessary for personal and social development. Without obstacles, we can't grow. And if we can't grow, then we turn into a swamp. We stagnate. And as a result, it's important to give as many people the option to and provide the best possible circumstances for them to thrive. We don't want to throw extra obstacles at someone who can't handle it or maybe is having a difficult time. And we don't want to make things easy for the best of us, because if we make things easy for the best of us, that will very quickly turn them into the worst of us, and we will see a decline in happiness, progress. A great example I would give you is the Romans. There was no reason why the Romans could not have invented the steam engine and had the Industrial Revolution hundreds of years before. They had the same intelligence as we do. They had the plans for the steam engine, but what they had was slaves. And because of those slaves, there was no need to build machines. You don't build a ceiling fan because you've got a human being that you own to fan you. And the society declined, and the Roman Empire fell, and we wouldn't see the steam engine for several thousand years more. So that would be my answer. That's why equality is important. It's because the best of us need to struggle to become their best selves, and the worst of us certainly don't need salt in the wound.
All right, Croc, you wanted to say something?
Well, I would pose the question to Brent specifically, but actually both anarcho-communist and capitalist. and I got to say something after this, but I would pose the question, what makes your system, what gives you the right to impose your almost fantastical system on others? I mean, in real life, I can't think of a single example of either of these two things working for anything more than a very brief, flash of time. And everyone seems very content under the current form, more or less, of how things are done. I mean, but the other thing, did you say Sweden's rape statistics were false or something like that, Brent?
Indeed, I did. I said they were ridiculous. I won't say necessarily. I'm sure there's a study that says that, but what I'll tell you is it doesn't jive with how rapes are actually carried out in real life and how they are reported in real life.
Well, I'd say it's pretty certain that the Muslims are indeed targeting white women and attacking them specifically because they are white women and specifically because they are Muslims. I think it's ludicrous to say that the racist Swedish government is just making up statistics or something like that, and especially when we've had things like Rotherham and things like Cologne. I think it's indefensible to try and protect the Muslims at this point. Anyways, did you want to answer the question I asked? Both of you, anarcho guys.
Alex, why don't you take it first? I've talked enough.
All right, well, first I'll talk about immigration. So a broader point about statistics, it's important to look at broad data sets over many different groups of people over time. If you want to find a particular conclusion, you can always find some small data set over a particular time frame which will find it. But overall, immigrants are not only not more likely to commit crime, they're actually less likely, and there's a variety of information about that. Even if you do think they are a bit more likely to commit crime, you're talking about pretty small differences in overall crime rates. And crime is actually a pretty small problem in first world countries as a percentage of total issues. The reason it's given so much attention is that it's much more visible. People die and people suffer quietly every day, but those don't make the news as often. Particular crime, that makes the news. And because of this asymmetry of visibility, people who haven't looked at the data enough sort of believe that these sorts of things are more of a problem than they actually are. And it's because of this visibility. So then I'd talk about the system question. Sure, it's true that it hasn't been a pure anarcho-capitalist society. However, you can look at individual components that have all been done before in various times and places and build up support for the system that way. So, for example, there have been situations in which there's been law that's been generated without a monopolistic enforcer. There have been situations in which property rights have been used to advance economic well-being. You can look at every one of those individual components and then build up support for the systems. That'd be my brief answer to that.
Okay, Alex Fontana, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, just briefly, if I could, about I guess a comment that Brent made about the statistics on Muslim rapes and things like that being or immigrant or refugee rapes or whatever being blown out of proportion. Obviously, there's Rotterdam, there's Cologne, there's Sweden on a near daily basis. It's this isn't what it is it's a clash of civilizations, to use that phrase. The Muslims are coming into Western Europe. They have a completely different value system. Women in the West tend to dress a lot more scantily. When you're not used to seeing a woman and you're other than maybe her ankles and her eyes, and when you have a religion that is, and I'm sympathetic to Muslims. I'm very sympathetic to Muslims. I don't think they should be in the West, number one. But I'm very sympathetic to the fact that they are being exploited by colonialism and that their traditional cultures are being destroyed to make room for markets. And and oil and a variety of other issues. I'm very sympathetic towards them, but you have to understand that the psychology that's happening here, this isn't about traditional rape where the guy knows the victim. This is about a foreign group invading another country and realizing that they have carte blanche to do whatever the hell they want, because the media and Western civilization as a whole is so imbued and stranglehold by notions of political correctness that these people who are, I would say, sexually repressed by our standards, they are able to get away with murder basis. And then specifically for Scandinavian countries tend to be very lax in their laws. I mean, when you even look at Breivik, who killed, I'm not even sure how many, upwards of 80 people. And, you know, he's complaining about his human rights being violated because he doesn't get enough internet. I mean, that's absurd as well. And, you know, it's just Scandinavian liberalism is a problem in and of itself. I'll just end there.
All right, Matt, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think we're getting into the minutia of statistics and how bad is a crime really, and you know, relative to what happens on a daily basis and all these things. I think it goes far deeper than that. I think the real problem, which is causing so much turmoil in Europe right now, is that people cannot trust their institutions that they elect and fund to look out after their best interest. The German government, you know, lied to cover up Cologne. You know, it was a peaceful night, nothing happened. Rotherham went on for a decade. You know, Sweden has changed how it counts its rape statistics. I don't know how many times over the last several years, just to try to like smooth this problem out. And so, more than just, you know, how prevalent is this or how bad is this really? I think in principle, the true issue is just people are having trouble trusting their government. They're having trouble trusting their media. They're having trouble trusting their police. And we're seeing, like Alex just got done saying, political correctness bumping up against other forces going on in the world. And that's causing a lot of friction. That's why you're seeing Brexit. That's why we might see Marine Le Pen in France and all these other things happening, because people are really tired of getting led around. There's going to be a lot of uprooting going on and a lot of turmoil. And basically people are bringing it on themselves.
All right, yeah. So one of the things, I have a question that I want to ask Brenton. Now, Brenton, we had discussion before about the numbers and the Holocaust and the communists. Now, you said at one point that the reason why, even though the communists probably killed more people, it was worse because the Nazis were killing people for things they couldn't account for, i.e., their race, their racial identity. They can't choose that, is they're born that way, so that makes it somehow worse. So there's two questions here. One question is, if that's the communists did that too, you can't count who your parents are. You can't control who your parents are, but they killed you because of who your parents were. But the other issue is the left is now saying with transsexualism that it's not your born identity that's more important, it's the one you choose. So I imagine if somebody were to start genociding transsexuals, the left would say it's the worst thing ever because they're killing people for an identity they chose. So what's worse? What's more important, the identity you choose or the identity you're born with? It seems they want to have their cake and eat it too, but you can't.
Well, actually, you're incorrect in that you're misunderstanding how transsexuals work and how that psychological and social phenomenon works. There's two things. One, sex and gender are distinct, and they have been since the 1950s. That's the scientific consensus. Sex is biologically where you fall on the spectrum of male to female, what your dangly bits are. Gender is what society says that means for you. Because you have these outward bits, that means you like blue instead of pink. That means you're going to be more likely to want to fight. That means you're going to be more likely to be the sexual aggressor. Whereas if you happen to have a different set of dangly bits or not dangly bits, then suddenly there are all of these other social expectations. And I think humans, we look at things and oftentimes, like Emma Goldman said, we put too much emphasis on nature and not enough on nurture. I mean, you can trace boys' preference for blue and girls' preference for pink straight back to a an advertising campaign in like the early 1900s. You can see pictures of like the young FDR. He's in a dress, because people just didn't bother with that when they were kids. There's so many of this stuff is created by human culture, and I think it's us underestimating how powerful human culture is. So then we go down to biological sex. Now, biological sex is also not the simple binary that we would assume. I've got friends who are scientists who working, at some of the highest levels. I got a guy who's currently a cancer researcher, and my cousin is also a scientist. And, you talk to them about this stuff, and the thing is that it's not just one or two things that go into are you male or are you female? It's not just XY chromosomes. A lot of us were taught that as children, but that's not really how it works. And of course, that's too simplistic an idea. There's about 5 different factors that determine gender. Most of us fall into the male or female, but a small percentage of the population fall into intersex, and several different varieties of intersex. So what's happening is that someone is biologically predisposed to identify with a different social gender. They want to be treated that way. It appeals to them. They feel that they are that person. That's not a choice of theirs. That is biology pushing them in that direction. Now, there may be some elements of choice and some elements of culture as well. But I think, so first off, trans people are like the overall scientific consensus is that they were born that way. They're not choosing it. It's just confusing for some people because they're relying on old, outdated science, and they're confusing culture for biology. So that was the first thing. And then what was the second question you had for me?
The second one you said was that, well, because the communists killed people for things that they chose to be, rather than things that they were born as, that was worse. But that's not true. You were killed because who your parents were. If your parents were...
Well, I don't know. Stalin, I don't recall him.
That's what Pol Pot did. Pol Pot would kill you if your parents were in Maoist China. If your parents were of the bourgeoisie or intellectuals, you'd be dead.
I haven't studied Pol Pot. What I will say is that people make there's the potential for evil in everyone. And everyone can make these hasty errors of judgment, as Buddhists call it fundamental darkness. These are cognitive mistakes that people make. We talk about the rape statistics. Honestly, I would challenge Alex to tell me exactly how many people were actually raped in these mass Muslim rapes, and then take a look at the population of the country and compare that number to what's happened overall, the quietly reported statistics on rapes. And also remember that most rapes are not reported. The vast majority of them are not. And again, carried out by the one that the victim knows. So it's hard to get statistics on that. It's also very easy to blame immigrants when you come up with one thing or another. But what I would say about this is why I think that the crimes of the Third Reich exceed the crimes of the Soviet Union, in the same way that I think that the crimes of the Third Reich exceed the crimes of the United States of America. There's a lot of leftists you'll talk to, and they'll say, the Americans killed somewhere between 9 and 13 million Native Americans. And that's true. They did. But I think it's probably closer to 9 or 10. But they did it over a much longer period of time. It was a slow genocide, and the number of people died. It doesn't make a difference so much to the people who died, but it does make a difference in the sense of, are these viable systems of government, and are they viable policies? I would say the Soviets, absolutely not, definitely not viable, and that the huge numbers that they killed shows that, but also the United States, once again, huge numbers of people that we killed. Israel is currently involved in a genocide against the people of Gaza. These are not, systems of government that we should be pulling for. But when you make identity a crime, as opposed to even having the pretense of some form of Enlightenment values, what happens is that you have crossed a Rubicon into where someone can be convicted without committing a crime. Even if the crime that you have committed is a lie, that is still better for society in the long run, because eventually all of like the evil people who have abused that system will die off, and eventually some people who actually believe in those ideals will come to take power again. And that is much better in the long run than when the ideals criminalize a person's nature as opposed to their actions. So
Okay. Yeah, I know. Alex Brewster, you had a question?
Yeah, so just say for the people that are claiming that refugee attacks are really significant, what is the probability that any given immigrant will commit a violent crime like a rape or a murder, and what is the rate for native-born citizens? So that'd be my question.
Who was it directed to?
Anyone who wanted to oppose my position.
Yeah. Can I answer that?
Yeah, you can kind of do that, Alex.
Yeah. The statistics are that I don't give a crap about the statistics. My politics are essentially that greater amount of difference between people creates greater amount of problems, and that these people should not exist within our societies to begin with. So I don't care whether native-born or foreign-born commits more crime. I don't think there should be foreign-born. I don't think that should, there is this, like, what is this tendency to measure, like, who's worse, the immigrant or the native? I don't care. Should be no immigrant, so that question should not exist.
All right. I think, Matt, you wanted to ask a question. Just
Can I respond to that?
yeah, go ahead. Still, yeah, sure.
So, but you basically just told me that you don't have evidence and you don't care about evidence, and yet you feel really strongly that you need to ban certain people from coming to the country. Is that basically your view? Could you respond?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. The other Alex.
Yeah. No, my view is that there's significant evidence to suggest that Muslims are, just to keep going back on this or whatever, or Mexicans are committing crimes or Muslims are committing, there's significant evidence to suggest that immigrants are committing crimes no matter what. And that's, my focus is that I don't care whether these statistics outweigh the statistics of native-born people, which, by the way, is also like, it's a false dichotomy as well, like, because native-born population is going to vastly outstrip the number of immigrants as far as the pool you're drawing from. I mean, I guess you can get representational percentages, but I really don't care about. I've taken multiple statistics classes in university. I realize with statistics you can pretty much have a statistic say anything you want it to say if you dress it up a certain way. There's a lot of confirmation bias. There's a lot of bias that goes into statistics anyways. I think if you use the mainstream media as your source, there's a big debate about whether the media is lying about everything right now in the US, and all you have to do is look at Walter Lippmann and the formation of the Cruel Committee for World War I. And yes, the media has been lying to the United States people about everything for the last 100 years.
Yeah, okay. Here's a question for Brenton. And this is, I think, what a lot of traditionalist conservatives and alt-right people see and don't like about the left is when you talked about the immigrants, the presumption was the immigrants, or rather the natives, bore the burden of evidence. The native people are xenophobic because they don't want Muslims coming in and gang raping them, and that the far right, whatever that is right now, can manipulate people and scare them. When at the same time, the left has been shrieking about the non-existent phantom Nazis in the United States since at least the 90s. I mean, I remember this crap growing up where Hillary Clinton was saying all the militias were Nazis. I mean, this is the most insane, absurd scaremongering. At least the Islamic powers are serving, the Islamic terrorists claim to be building a one world Ummah and are an actual threat. And during the Cold War, the Soviet Union was an actual threat. But the phantom Nazis after 1945 have never been a threat. And yet the left just won't shut up about phantom Nazis. And I think that's what gets a lot of people on the right upset. It's like you always, I mean, for instance, the rogue white nationalist shooters like Berwick, well, why isn't he a victim? The same way the Islamic rapist is a victim. I mean, because the Islamic rapist is a minority, just like Berwick is a minority in a sense. But the left is going to say, no, Berwick is bad. The Muslim needs to be understood. Well, why don't you just understand Berwick, where he's coming from? He's just a misunderstood guy like the Muslim rapist. So yeah, that's kind of the question.
I'm confused. When did I say that the Muslim rapist was misunderstood? Any rapist, anyone who commits any kind of rape.
Yeah. No, what I'm getting at is you're always defending, the left is always defending Islamic aggression against the West by rationalizing it. But then they say when the right maybe exaggerates it, when they themselves, they don't really believe on principle that exaggeration is wrong. The phantom Nazis don't exist, and we've been hearing this like since 1946.
Two phantom Nazis in this exact conversation.
Do they have political power? Do they have political power? Are they raping people like the Islamic peoples right now?
First off, I'm not sure I agree that the Islamic people are raping people with any greater frequency than anyone else is raping people. Crime is going to happen in any society. And as Alex pointed out, immigrants tend to actually be less criminally minded than the general population because they need support from the people around them and they don't need to be causing themselves problems like that. Now, we want to talk about, so I am 100% down with denouncing the Islamic rapists like every other rapist, but I'm not going to say Islamic rapists. I'm going to say rapists because evil is something that is not cultural. It is something that is personal in so many ways. And I also think that the reason leftists go and defend Muslims, for instance, as often as we do, is because we see the propaganda that is put out against them, and we see that it is a pretext for war and imperialism. You want to talk about radical Islam. Well, radical Islam grew out of Wahhabism, which was created, well, it wasn't created, it existed before, but it was a very small minority. But the CIA takes a look, they see the godless commies of the Soviet Union moving into Afghanistan, suddenly moving into our territory, and what do? They find the perfect weapon against the godless commies, a bunch of religious zealots who are going to fight to the last man.
Okay, hold on. I got to stop this here. That is exactly what gave rise to fascism. This is what I'm talking about. The left creates these radical socialist, anarchist, Bolshevik movements. Then the fascist is a reaction. But when they're the reaction, you attack them as the worst thing ever. But when Islam is a reaction, well, we just have to understand it. I mean, the left created fascism.
Look, can I just say, Brent said something that is just so asimine. I just have to step in just for one moment.
Hold on, stop real quick. Right now, Alex is going to answer Brent, and then we're going to move on to a question I think Croc had. So, and then we'll go back to the normal standard that I set up. Go ahead, Alex.
All right. Well, Brent made this point that that evil is not a cultural thing; that it's a personal thing, which is this. It's like what he's doing is this microcosm of what the left loves to do, and it loves to pretend that there are no groups with different values in the world, and that those values are not viewed from. For example, I have a Eurocentric perspective about things because I'm a European and I see the world through our lens. And other people have a different value set and they're brought up in a different set of systems. And we can view those values in a hierarchical way. Whether we want to moralize them or not, that's up for debate. But to just limit evil as a personal, choice, like this is the left that always loves to say there's no groups, there's just individuals. And it's funny that the left, this atomized view of individuals also aligns itself perfectly well to the dictates and the things, the goals that capitalism wants to accomplish by reducing everybody to a consumer.
It's nice that you accuse the collectivist commie of seeing people too much as individuals and not noticing groups. Look, dude. Maybe I maybe I a little overemphasized that evil is a personal thing, though I do think it is a personal thing mostly. I'm sure there are aspects of culture that we might disagree with, that we might think are toxic, and I'll agree with you 150% on that. But what I'm going to tell you is there is not a person on this earth that wakes up, drinks a cup of baby blood, rubs their hands together, and talks about how, and thinks about how they're going to be the greatest villain in the world and cause all of these problems. Or you know what? Maybe there's one. Maybe there's like one guy. But I guarantee you that one psychopath is not someone that you ever want to make policy based upon, because when you do that, you force everyone into a bed of Procrustes. You want to talk about Muslims? I walk out my door. I live in Harlem. You know, I live in a mostly Dominican neighborhood. I have never felt unsafe in my neighborhood. I know Muslims. Muslims run the delis by me. They sell me my lunch. And you're sitting here telling me these people are basically orcs and that they're here to destroy? I can tell you that flies directly in the face of every reality that I have ever experienced in my entire life. And the only reason I can think that you might think that is you haven't met any, or you haven't met enough. And instead what you're doing is you're getting suckered in by government propaganda that justifies war, expansion, and subordination. So no, I think it's ridiculous that we should be looking at these people as some sort of a monolith.
Okay, hold on, Brent. From now on, we're going to keep 2 minutes to response time, and then if you don't keep the 2 minutes, I'm going to mute you, because a lot of people want to talk, and it's hard to talk when other people don't give them a chance. So right now, I think Brent B wanted to say something, and then Jelly Croc wanted to say something too. So let's go with Brent B. You wanted to say something?
Do you mean Alex Brewster?
Alex B. Sorry, yeah, Alex B.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So I'd like to respond to the claims about immigrants as well. I mean, if you think that rape statistics are false, then you don't really have any support for your view that immigrants are posing a threat in that way. That's just how it works. It seems like you have other reasons for opposing immigration, and a couple isolated attacks, which are highly publicized, are more of a post hoc justification. You said you don't believe the media, but that's also false, because you seem to believe reports of immigrant attacks when they conform to your own views. So a more accurate description would be you don't believe the media when it doesn't agree with what you believe prior to that. So it seems like if you can't actually come up with some statistical evidence that immigrants are significantly Alex Fontana, I believe. Yeah, that's who this is addressed to. So if you can't come up with some serious statistics that actually demonstrate that immigrants are a significant threat, then I think you're just not justified to believe it. I think that's generally how evidence works, that you don't have a justification unless you have some actual evidence.
Okay, Jelly Croc, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, first of all, please let's not accuse people of being Nazis. I specifically said I'm not a Nazi. I'm pretty sure Alex isn't a Nazi. Also, let's try not to accuse people of false consciousness, like I've heard several times done in this call already. These aren't productive. I don't know what you're aiming at here, just saying you don't believe something because it's not actually your beliefs, or I don't know, because you haven't met X number of Muslims. Okay, we're not going to get anywhere with that kind of talk. The other thing I wanted, if I may, try and reframe the conversation into something that's more productive for everyone, and go with our core fundamental disagreements. I mean, I don't think. I think we're just saying our opinions on a couple of issues. Like, okay, statistics doesn't matter. This isn't a talk about Muslim rapes. This is a talk about what we all believe here. I don't think statistics are necessary for this talk at the moment. We can have another talk later, maybe. I don't know. But I think we should refocus the conversation on what we disagree on and what we actually believe. And I would say the Muslims are a threat to Europe just by their very being in Europe. I mean, they are actively degenerating European culture and identity just by being there, just by physically being there. As with every other race that is non-European, by being in Europe is actively degenerating it.
Okay, I have a question for Alex B. What do you've seen, like the sort of economic control on the right represented by the alt-right, and the kind of economic controls represented on the left by socialism. So how would you, what would you begin criticizing those two different justifications for economic control as we see it?
Well, I'd have to get more clarity on which.
Okay, let's say fascism and socialism. Fascism and socialism. both have some sort of economic controls on the economy. And as an anarcho-capitalist, you wouldn't want any controls on the economy. So what would be some of the objections you'd raise on that?
Well, I think we'd be more specific for if it's a pretty broad topic. So fascists, I don't know. I'd need to have a more issue-based question because I tend not. I guess I'd say I tend not to like the left-right dichotomy. I think there are a lot of different groups within the organizations. For example, socialists include anarchist socialists, syndicalists, state socialists, and they each have their own critique, and they each require their own response. So, I mean, I could just talk forever about economics, but
okay. How about this way? How about this way? How does the calculation problem in your mind undercut central planning? I mean, what's the central insight there?
Okay, so basically, the point is that there's a variety of distributed knowledge, both of values and of physical goods, that doesn't exist in one place and can't easily be communicated to one place. And the way to deal with this is to have a price system wherein which individuals sort of produce this knowledge surrogate. So say, for example, I have a particular good that I've created and I sell that on the market. I'm providing information in two ways. First of all, the existence of the good, and second of all, someone demonstrates that they value that good by agreeing to purchase it. If you don't have that purchase, it's very hard to actually communicate value in a way that's meaningful. People can just say you want something, but just saying that you want something doesn't actually prove it because actions speak louder than words. You can say you want something without actually explaining what you would give up to get that thing. If you actually give up good X for good Y, then you've actually demonstrated that you prefer good X to good Y. And that's some information that requires exchange to be communicated. I could go into more specifically, but I don't want to.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we're nearing the end. We'll give Alex the last. He wants to answer. Alex B wants to not B. Alex F wants to answer a few questions that were addressed to him, and then we're going to wrap it up, and we'll all have our final words. So when Alex is done responding to some of the questions that were asked him, we're going to start going down in alphabetical order, having our final thoughts.
Yeah, it might just be easier to just use Fontana if the two Alexes is becoming confusing. But
sorry about that. Yeah.
Address some criticisms that were made against my position to try to clarify what I mean. There was some criticism about me not caring about statistics unless they conform to my confirmation bias, and also something along the lines of not caring about media sources unless they were the same. The major thing is, again, I think somebody else made the point who seems to be allied with me. I think it was the Jolly Crocodile fellow, that I don't care about the statistics. I made that clear. What I care about is the demographic and the cultural threat of having basically unending waves of immigration into Europe. And if these people are committing crimes, then yes, okay, it helps my confirmation bias to point those out. The other thing is that those crimes, Rotterdam and Cologne and many of these things, were not right about them. They didn't report them. It was these things were exposed by alternative modes of media. And the media is owned by less than 1% of the population, and the majority of the people that own the media happen to be Jewish ethnicity. And the Jews most certainly have an agenda that they would like to put forth upon the Western world, make no mistake about it. And this is why I have tremendous sympathy for Muslims, because Europe has always had traditionally two enemies. There was the external enemy, there was the internal enemy of the Jew, and the external enemy of the Muslims. When the Muslims have become an internal enemy, it only means that the traditional internal enemy has basically manipulated us to the point of allowing that to happen. So I think that they are the unwitting, puppets of a sinister plan to basically rid the world of any any group identity that's capable of standing up for its own interest.
Okay, so do you have any closing statements? Alex, you're first on. Actually, no, Alex B is first. So yeah, do you have any closing statements before we sign off?
Yeah, I'll just make one quick clarification about my own views by pointing to a distinction within anarcho-capitalism. So broadly speaking, there are two types of economic and philosophical derivations of that view. One is the Rothbardian Austrian economic type view, and the other is more on the line of David Friedman and ethical intuitionism. So Rothbard's moral view is axiomatic. He tries to get a natural rights type position, and I don't think that holds, because I think for any axiomatic moral view, there's always going to be some extreme exception that makes that vulnerable. So I don't take the axiomatic view there. And regarding Austrian economics, there have been some important Austrian economic insights, but I'm more aligned with the neoclassical, roughly speaking, insights that go with David Friedman, that type of situation. So that's something I didn't get to mention earlier, and that would be a quick distinction I'd make.
Okay, Fontana, you're next. Do you have any final statements you want to make?
Yeah. You know what? Nothing beyond just some blowhard DS Volt type LARPing. You know, it was semi-constructive conversation, and I thank you for allowing me to be a part of it.
You're welcome, Fontana. Brent, any last words?
Yeah, I'm actually happy that we're having this dialogue. There were a lot of views expressed that I consider to be vile and immoral, and things that I will spend my absolute lifetime fighting, and that I am more than willing to put my body on the line to protect Jews, women, or anyone else from bullies and fools. You know, a while ago here in New York, 6 Nazis jumped 2 guys exiting a bar. And one of them pulled a knife and tried to murder him just because he saw a Antifa sticker on one of the kids' phones. And the kid wasn't even a part of Antifa. He was just a grad student, you know, and thought it was a cool symbol. You know, and a few years ago, there was a cab driver. Most of the cab drivers here in New York are Muslim. And the guy got into the back of his cab, and he asked the guy if he was a Muslim, and the guy responded, Assalamu alaikum. And a little while after that, the guy slit his throat with a knife from the back seat of the car. You can see enemies around you everywhere. And you can try to stand up supposedly for your team or your people, but in my experience, humans are far, far better than most any of us, myself included, give us credit for. And the vast, vast majority of people, regardless of where they come from, are much more likely to help you and much more likely to be closer to you than you might otherwise interpret. And what I would do is I would challenge the people who take issue with that. Go and do what Jesus did. You know, go out, see these people that are supposedly degenerates, meet these people that are different than you. And, you know, it's going to be scary at first, but if you can overcome that kind of fear, and none of us want to live as cowards, I think you're going to find that they're very different than what you may have been told and what you may imagine. And so I guess what I want to sign off with is, once again, I think I'm going to cleave to the mystic law of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And I think that even if Buddhism is like, you know, hokum made up, I would rather live in that world and deny reality and die as a result than embrace some of the doctrines that I've heard tonight. But I am still.
That's all Buddhism is. It's a big denial of reality.
You don't do that anymore. You gotta stay muted. You're talking. All right. So next is
I'm actually happy about the dialogue, and I hope I have not been too. Let's just say I respect everyone for coming in here and doing their best at this.
So next up is Matt. Do you have anything you want to say at the end?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the topics got a bit beyond my scope, so I didn't say too many words. With respect to the cultural problems, I think what I really want to stress is that our institutions need to be clean with what's going on. When the institutions cover up events and things of that nature, distrust breeds distrust. And so clarity of communication, clarity of thought. People need to quit lying to and about each other. That includes the media. A lot of people are waking up to how bad the media is. But I don't know. I just hope for the best for humanity.
All right, Sean, do you have anything you want to end with?
I'll try and keep it quick, but I don't know. I'll have to touch on a couple things. So Brent asked, how can you prove that Western civilization or European civilization is objectively better? I would say, what has Islam or the whole Arabian Peninsula done for the resume of our species? There are single zip codes in New York that have produced more than the entire Arab world in all of its existence. I'm sure there are single people who have done more that have produced more. Islam is absolutely nothing worthy of consideration. It is an anti-civilizational ethnic mafia. That's it. In European culture is the best culture around. It has produced the most, and it continues to produce the most. So yes, it is objectively the best. And even if it wasn't, it still is the best because you should, as a European, as a white person, I am proud of my own culture. I am proud of what is mine. A lot of the, if I could have a takedown of the anarcho-communism and anarcho-capitalism, the thing is, this is utopian ideas here, and they're never going to work, and no one seems to be even sold on these ideas. How are you going to sell these ideas to anybody? It's the revolt against the higher by the lower. It is pure barbarism. It's wanting to tear down order because you're jealous of what other people have, that other people are better. It's wanting to drag down the best and the most worthy members of society and propping up the most degenerate, the weakest, the thinking that crowds, just because there are a lot of people, that crowds have a wisdom just because you get a bunch of people together. That's false. It's not going to work. And I'm sure if any of these ideas were tried, like anarcho-communism or capitalism, they would end pretty horribly. But look, the core of my ideas is not based on violence, even though it's probably true that to get what I want would probably require violence at this point. The elites have become so alienated and estranged from what the people want. And I think what we all agree on at our core is that there is something wrong with the West. So I guess we all have that.
All right. Well,
I guess that's it.
Thanks everybody for coming on. This is Todd Lewis, host of the Praise of Folly podcast, signing off.